Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. My name is Ripe, and in today's HOA title story, a homeowner association tried to seize my family farm. They sent fake security officers to my property, forged legal documents with my signature, and when I refused to comply, they showed up with weapons. So I did what any farmer would do. I grabbed my shotgun. And the XXL title story starts like this. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. This happened over the course of about 3 years, but the main events went down recently enough that I'm still dealing with some of the aftermath. I've been debating whether to share this story, but after everything that happened, I figure other people might get some satisfaction out of how this all played out. So some background first. I inherited my family's farm when my older brother passed away unexpectedly. The farm has been in our family for many years. It's not huge by farming standards, but it's been our livelihood for decades. My brother had been running it since our dad retired, and I'd been helping out part-time while working my regular job back in town. When he died, I quit my job and moved back to the farmhouse full-time to keep the operation going. The property sits right on the edge of what used to be a rural area, but over the past 15 years or so, developers have been buying up land and building these weird suburban developments all around us. Most of the farmers in the area have sold out and moved on, but our family never wanted to give up the land. It's been good to us, and honestly, farming is in my blood. I really could not imagine doing anything else. Now here's where things get interesting though. About 6 months after I took over the farm, I started getting letters in the mail from something called the Entitlement Estate Homeowners Association, name changed for privacy reasons. At first I thought they were just being neighborly, maybe introducing themselves since their development was adjacent to my property, but when I actually read the letters I realized they wanted me to join their HOA. The first letter was polite enough, explaining that while my property was not technically part of their development, they felt it would be mutually beneficial for me to join their association. They claimed it would help maintain property values in the area and ensure everyone was following the same standards. They included a packet of their rules and regulations, which was about 30 pages of the most ridiculous nonsense I'd ever read. According to their bylaws, HOA members could not have vehicles parked in driveways overnight, could not hang laundry outside, had to maintain their lawns to specific height requirements, and needed approval for any exterior changes to their homes. They also had restrictions on things like garden sheds, fencing, and even what colors you could paint your house. Reading through it, I couldn't help but laugh. Half the stuff they prohibited was essential to running a working farm. I tossed the letter in the trash and figured that would be the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was a bit more insistent, claiming that since my property bordered the entitlement estates community, I had a civic responsibility to join their association. They also mentioned that my farm's agricultural activities were negatively impacting the aesthetic appeal of their neighborhood and that joining the HOA would help us work together to address these concerns. I was starting to get annoyed, but I still thought this was just some overzealous HOA board member who didn't understand property law. I wrote back in a polite but firm letter explaining that my farm was private property and had existed long before their development and that I had no interest in joining their association. I thought that would settle things, but it didn't. Over the next few months, their letters kept coming. They got progressively more aggressive and demanding. The HOA president, who signed all the letters as Karen Pemberton, President, Entitlement Estates HOA, started making increasingly absurd claims about my property. She insisted that since my farm was within the greater entitlement community area, I was subject to their authority whether I wanted to be or not. One letter claimed that my tractors and farm equipment were unsightly and violated their community standards. Another one complained about the smell of my livestock and demanded that I relocate my animals to a different part of my property. And by the way, guys, can we also relocate HOA presidents to a different part of the earth? That would be absolutely brilliant. Anyway, the most ridiculous one demanded that I remove an old red barn that had been on the property since the 1960s because it apparently did not match the aesthetic vision of their community. I started keeping all these letters in a file, figuring I might need them eventually, and my gut was telling me this was not gonna end well. However, things really escalated when Karen and a couple of other HOA board members showed up at my door one evening. Karen stood on my porch like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, and that fake smile plastered on her face.
Mr. Wilson, I'm here to discuss your immediate compliance with entitlement estates community standards.
She announced, not even waiting for me to invite her in. Ma'am, I've told you before, I'm not part of your HOA, I said, keeping my voice level.
Oh, but you are.
She said, waving her clipboard.
Your property falls within our designated community boundaries. You simply can't opt out of progress, Mr. Wilson.
My family has owned this land for 40 years. Your development went up around us. Karen actually rolled her eyes and said,
That's irrelevant. The county has approved our expanded jurisdiction. Now, about your barn, that rust color is completely unacceptable. Our architectural committee requires all structures to be painted in approved color tones from the Benjamin Moore Heritage Collection.
I stared at her. You want me to repaint my 60-year-old working barn?
It's not a want, it's requirement. And frankly, Mr. Wilson, your entire operation here is bringing down our values. My neighbors pay good money for a premium community experience, not to look at farm equipment and smell.
She wrinkled her nose.
Whatever that smell is.
That would be manure. It's called farming.
Well, it needs to stop. We've prepared a transition plan to help you convert to more appropriate lands to use. Perhaps a nice garden center or boutique agricultural experience for the children.
A boutique agricultural experience?
Yes! You could have little petting zoo, maybe some educational tours, very quaint and contained, much more suitable for a family community.
I rubbed my forehead. Mrs. Pemberton, I grow actual food that feeds actual people. This is not a theme park.
Mr. Wilson, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. The board has been very patient with your eccentricities, but patience has limit.
She straightened up to her full height of maybe 5'3".
If you continue to resist reasonable community standards, we will have no choice but to pursue legal remedies. The courts take property value protection very seriously.
Well, the courts also take property rights seriously.
We'll see about that,
she said with a satisfied smirk.
Good day, Mr. Wilson. I expect to see progress within 30 days. If I don't, well, there will be consequence and we will take action.
As she clip-clopped back to her white BMW in her heels, I heard her mutter,
Some people just don't understand civilization.
After they left, I called a lawyer friend of mine to ask about my rights. He confirmed what I already knew. They had no legal authority over my property whatsoever, and he suggested I send them a cease and desist letter, which I did. For a few weeks, things were quiet, and I thought maybe they had finally gotten the message. But then I got a letter that made my blood boil. And by the way, guys, before we find out what was in the letter, I have to confess something. The talented young woman you just heard that was narrating Karen Pemberton is not just the owner of the Readers and Story Slices here on YouTube, and not just my girlfriend as many of you know, but now she is actually my wife. Yes, we got married. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave some kind comments for her, because she's always a little bit conscious about reading these Karen parts because she thinks her English is not good enough. Anyway, thank you in advance, and also don't forget to like the video. So, the letter was an official-looking document claiming to be a notice of lien against my property for so-called unpaid HOA dues and fees. And according to this document, I owed the Entitlement Estates HOA over $3,000 in back dues, late fees, and compliance violation penalties. It threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 30 days. I immediately called my lawyer friend and he told me to bring the document to his office. When he looked it over, he said it was completely fraudulent and had no legal standing whatsoever. You cannot just declare a lien against someone's property because you want them to join your HOA. He advised me to file a police report for harassment and keep documenting everything. The police officer who took my report was sympathetic, but said that there wasn't much they could do about civil disputes, and he suggested I might want to consider a restraining order if the harassment continued. At the time I thought that seemed like overkill, but I was starting to realize that these people were not gonna give up easily. A few weeks later I discovered just how far they were willing to go. I was checking my mail when I found an envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside was what appeared to be an official copy of HOA membership documents with my signature on them. According to these papers, I had voluntarily joined the Entitlement Estates HOA and agreed to all their terms and conditions. The problem was, I had never signed these documents. Someone had forged my signature. I drove straight to the county clerk's office to find out what was going on, and the clerk explained that the HOA had filed these documents claiming I had joined their association. When I told her the signature was forged, she said I would need to file an official complaint and provide evidence that the signature was not mine. This is when I really started to get mad. These people were not just being annoying anymore, they were committing fraud. I spent the next week gathering evidence, including examples of my real signature and witness statements from people who could verify I had never agreed to join the HOA. My lawyer helped me file complaints with both the county and the state attorney general's office, but the HOA was not done yet. A few days after I filed my fraud complaint, Karen showed up at my farm with 2 other people she introduced as HOA compliance officers, and they claimed they were there to conduct an inspection of my property to document violations of community standards. I told them they were trespassing and needed to leave immediately. And by the way, guys, if these HOA patrol compliance officers showed up at your private property, how would you respond? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, Karen pulled out a folder and waved the forged documents at me.
"These papers say that you're a member of our association," she said, "which means we have the right to inspect your property for compliance issues."
I explained that the documents were forged and that I'd already filed complaints with the authorities, and the so-called compliance officers started walking around my property anyway, taking pictures and making notes. When I told them to stop, one of them said that they were just doing their job, and that's when I lost my temper. I told them they had 30 seconds to get off my property before I called the police. Karen laughed and said they were not going anywhere until they finished their inspection. I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. They finally left, but not before Karen shouted that I would be hearing from their lawyer. She also said that if I didn't start cooperating, they would take legal action to force me to transfer ownership of my property to the HOA for community management. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people actually thought they could steal my farm. After this, I drove to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order against Karen and the entire HOA board. And well, eventually, the judge granted a temporary order and scheduled a hearing. In the meantime, I had official legal documents prohibiting them from coming onto my property or contacting me. For about a month, things were relatively quiet. The restraining order seemed to be working, but I should have known better than to think these people would respect a court order any more than they respected property rights. I was out in the back pasture fixing a fence when I saw a white SUV with Entitlement Estate Security written on the side pulling into my driveway. 2 men in pseudo-police uniforms got out and started walking around my property. When they saw me coming towards them, one of them held up some kind of badge. "HOA Compliance Patrol," he announced. "We are here to conduct a routine property inspection." I couldn't believe these people were still at it. I told them about a restraining order and demanded they leave my property immediately. The first officer, and I used that term loosely since they had no actual authority, said that they were just doing their job and had every right to be there. "Sir, you need to understand that this property is part of the Entitlement Estates community," the second officer said. "We have documentation showing you're a member of the HOA, which gives us the authority to ensure compliance with community standards." I explained once again that the documents were forged and that they were violating a court-issued restraining order. They exchanged glances but did not seem particularly concerned. The first officer started taking pictures of my barn and equipment shed. I pulled out my phone to call the cops, but they were in the back of my property where cell service is spotty. By the time I got through to 911, the fake security officers were gone. When the real police arrived an hour later, there wasn't much they could do except file another report. This happened 3 more times over the next few weeks. Each time, these so-called HOA patrol officers would show up, claim authority over my property, take pictures, and leave before the real police could arrive. They were smart enough to avoid me most of the time, coming when they knew I was likely to be working in the fields or away from the house. I was getting frustrated with law enforcement's inability to do anything about the situation. The police kept saying it was a civil matter and that I needed to handle it through the courts. But the court system moved slowly, and in the meantime, these people were trespassing on my property almost weekly. My lawyer filed additional complaints and motions, but the legal process was taking forever. Meanwhile, I was dealing with constant stress and harassment. I could not focus on running my farm because I was always worried about what these lunatics would do next. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I was in the house having breakfast when I heard vehicles pulling into my driveway. Looking out the window, I saw not 1 but 2 white SUVs with the fake security company logos. 4 men in uniforms got out and started walking around my property like they owned the place. I grabbed my phone and went outside to confront them. The same 2 officers from before were there, plus 2 new faces. One of the new guys was carrying what looked like an official clipboard and was making notes as he walked around. "What are you doing on my property?" I demanded. The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a cheap security company badge, looked up from his clipboard. "Final inspection before property transfer," he said matter-of-factly. Property transfer? What are you talking about? He pulled out a folder and showed me some official-looking documents. HOA board has voted to assume management of this property due to persistent violations and non-compliance. You've got 30 days to vacate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people had completely lost touch with reality. I told them the documents were fraudulent and that they needed to leave my property immediately or I would call the police. "Sir, we are the police," one of the new officers said with a smirk. "HOA Enforcement Division." That's when I realized these people were not just delusional, they were dangerous. They actually believed they had some kind of legal authority over my property, and I told them about the restraining order and threatened to call the real police. "Go ahead and call," the leader said. "We'll be here when they arrive. This is official HOA business." I went back into the house and called 911, but I knew from experience that it would take at least 20 minutes for officers to arrive. When I came back outside, the fake security team was taking measurements and photos of my house and outbuildings. One of them was actually trying to look through my windows, and that's when I'd had enough. I went back into the house and got my shotgun from the gun cabinet. It's an old Remington 870 that belonged to my father, and I keep it for dealing with predators that sometimes go after my chickens. Or HOA predators that go after your properties. I loaded it and went back outside. "I want you off my property right now," I called out, keeping the shotgun pointed at the ground but visible. The fake officers looked up from whatever they were doing, and the leader smiled like he thought I was bluffing. "Sir, you need to put that weapon away," he said. "Threatening law enforcement officers is a felony." "You are not law enforcement officers," I replied. "You are trespassers, and this is my property. I'm telling you one last time to leave." But instead of leaving, they started walking towards me. The leader was still talking about how they had authority, and I was interfering with official business. I backed up towards my porch, keeping the shotgun ready. "This is your last warning," I said. "Get off my property, or I will defend myself." They kept coming, and one of them took out a huge baseball bat. He looked legit insane, and I was getting scared. When they got within distance of me, I raised a shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed across the valley, and suddenly the fake officers didn't look so confident anymore. "You're crazy," one of them shouted. "You cannot just shoot at people." "I didn't shoot at anyone," I replied. "That was a warning. The next one won't be though." They stopped advancing, but they didn't leave either. The leader was on his radio calling someone, probably Karen or their fake security company, and I could hear him saying something about armed resistance and need backup, and that's when I realized the situation was about to get completely out of hand. These people were so deep in their delusion that they actually thought they were engaged in some kind of legitimate law enforcement action. In their minds, I was the criminal for defending my own property. I made a decision that I knew I might regret, but I was out of options. When they started moving towards me again, one of them with a bat, the other with what looked like a knife, I aimed the shotgun at the leader's legs and fired. The shot hit him in the lower leg, but I was fairly far away, and at that distance I guess it was not life-threatening or something, but it was definitely enough to get his attention, to say the least. He went down yelling and cursing, and the other 3 fake officers suddenly realized this was not a game anymore. "Holy crap, he actually shot him!" one of them screamed. They dragged their wounded colleague back to one of their SUVs and then took off, tires spinning in my gravel driveway. I called 911 again and reported that I had fired my weapon in self-defense against trespassers who refused to leave my property, and the next few hours were intense. Real police officers arrived, followed by an ambulance, detectives and so on, and I was questioned extensively about what happened and why I felt it was necessary to use deadly force. Fortunately, I'd been documenting everything for months. I had copies of all the harassing letters, photos of the trespassers on my property, police reports from previous incidents, and court documents showing the restraining order. I also had security camera footage from my front porch that clearly showed these fake HOA officers advancing on me after I had repeatedly told them to leave. It turned out that the sheriff's department had been getting complaints about these fake HOA security patrols for months already, and they'd been harassing other property owners in the area, claiming authority they didn't have and generally acting like wannabe cops. Honestly, the detective told me, I'm surprised it took this long for someone to stand up to them. The wounded man was treated at the local hospital, and he survived. He was arrested and charged with trespassing, harassment, and impersonating a law enforcement officer. So were the other 3 fake officers. But the real victory came when investigators started looking into HOA's activities. It turned out that Karen and her board had been running an elaborate fraud scheme for years. They had been filing false documents, forging signatures, and claiming authority over properties that were never part of their development, and they had been collecting dues from people who thought they were required to pay, and the district attorney's office filed criminal charges against the entire HOA board for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Karen was arrested at her house and charged with multiple felonies. The fake security company aita had been using was shut down and its owner was also arrested. The civil side of things worked out well too. My lawyer filed a massive lawsuit against the HOA, Karen personally, and the security company for harassment, trespassing, fraud, and emotional distress. We ended up settling for a substantial amount that more than covered my legal fees and compensated me for the years of harassment. The restraining order was made permanent and the judge added additional penalties for any future violations. Perhaps the most satisfying part was what happened to Karen. She lost her house when the legal bills and settlement costs piled up on her. The criminal charges resulted in a felony conviction and she ended up serving time in prison. The fake security company went out of business entirely and several of their officers were convicted of various crimes and had to find new careers. The guy I shot made a full recovery but ended up with a permanent limb that he probably deserved. As for me, I'm still farming my land and enjoying the peace and quiet. The entitlement estate's development is still there, but I have a new HOA board that seems to understand the concept of property boundaries. I have not heard a peep from them since the whole thing was settled. I did make some changes to my security setup though. I installed proper surveillance cameras around my property and put up additional no trespassing signs. I also joined the local property owners association, which is a legitimate group that actually helps farmers deal with encroachment from suburban developments, and the one thing that still amazes me is how far these people were willing to go with their delusion. They actually convinced themselves that they had legal authority over property they never owned or controlled. It's scary to think about how many other people might be getting scammed by similar schemes. And yeah, the farm is doing better than ever. Without the constant stress and distraction of dealing with HOA harassment, I've been able to focus on improving my operation, and my brother would have been proud to see how things turned out. He always said that the land was worth fighting for, and he was right. Sometimes the fight is harder than you expect, but in the end, standing up for what's yours is always worth it. And yeah guys, don't turn off the video just yet. The next one is a very interesting farmer-related Am I the A-hole story, and it is titled Am I the A-hole for not dumbing down my ability to ride a horse and basic farm care? So I, 42 female, got into a relationship with Michael, 45 male, about 6 months ago. During this time, I explained to him how I grew up on a farm and the things that I did. When we first discussed this, he seemed impressed by my abilities and willingness to get my hands dirty. Recently, his friends suggested we all go on a couple's date to a day in the life on a farmer. I was ecstatic to show off my skills because I knew none of them have ever stepped foot on one of their entire lives. He, however, asked me to take a seat so we could talk about this. Basically, he said he wanted me to give him a crash course in farm life before going, and for me to act like the other girlfriends and just be impressed by everything they do the whole day. I said, "You kidding, right?" He explained how he wanted to look good in front of his friends and not be emasculated by his woman at men's work. And damn guys, that's impressive. Some people really have fragile egos. Anyway, I reminded him how he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and this is not something you just learn in 2 weeks. He begged, so I agreed to help him learn. I guess he felt his 2 weeks of training would surpass my entire upbringing because he said I did not have to play weak anymore. Well, the day off, he was completely hopeless. Work started early, and literally only me and one couple were actually up early. The every first thing we were supposed to do was picking up chickens. He tried to do it how I showed it at first, but eventually he lost his cool, yelling and cursing at them. Only me and one other person actually did it right. Later we were supposed to try and chop wood. He got to 2.5, giving up after just barely splitting the third one. His friends and I chopped the required amount of 10 with their girlfriends, telling him to just sit back and drink sweet tea with them. The final straw was horseback, which really was the guide leading the horse in a circle while you ride it. Pretty much everyone did it, but he flaked out last second. I, however, told the guide that I was fine on my own. I honestly just rode slightly faster than them without the guide, and when I got off, he was gone. His friend had to drive me home that night. After 3 days and maybe 20 worry texts later, he told me he no longer wanted to be with me, and I was a competitive a-hole who just wouldn't let him have this, and I embarrassed him in front of his friends. At first, I didn't take it seriously till my friend group said what I did was wrong and he had more to prove and lose than me, and I should have been more supportive and let go of my pride. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think OP was an a-hole here or not? Comment number 1 said, no, not the a-hole. Don't let these people make you think you did something wrong. The guy is clearly insecure as hell. If a guy needs to be better than you for you to have a relationship with him, you don't need to be with that guy. He literally had nothing to prove or lose. It was all in his head. It's not your job to pretend to be incompetent to stroke some a-hole's fragile ego. Imagine the future with someone like that. He would do this constantly, needing to be better than you, making you feel like all his failures were your fault. No, ma'am. And the next one is from r/revenge stories, and it is titled Revenge on a Terrible Neighbor. So years ago, I rented a townhouse while working on a studio contract. The house was nice, 2 bedrooms that I shared with my girlfriend, now wife, and there was a single attached garage, which is a main part of the story. The next door neighbor, who we will call Chad, was a real piece of work. He was mid-30s, balding, which he tried to hide with a buzz cut, and one of the shortest men I've ever met. He compensated for his lack of height by having a giant lifted custom pickup truck that was too tall to park in his garage. His other pride and joy was a heavily modified Honda Civic, which he liked to rev the engine loudly most days. Chad had 4 friends who would sit with at the end of his driveway and drink beer all day, leaving empty beer cans everywhere. When I started renting the house in spring, Chad was initially friendly, offering to move his car to allow the movers easier access to the house. He parked in both spots despite a visitor lot right across the street. After the movers left, Chad mentioned that the previous tenants let him use their garage for his car in the winter, as his was full of exercise equipment and the sweet motorcycle he was building. I told him the landlord had not given me the key or the access code yet, and the only way I could open the garage was from the inside. Chad mentioned that neither his keys nor the code he had worked anymore either. A bit later, when I was talking to the landlord and mentioned Chad and the garage, he told me to never share the code, the keys, or the garage itself with Chad. The previous tenants had been robbed just after Christmas, the reason why they moved away, and the landlord suspected that Chad and his friends had been the ones responsible, despite there being no evidence. The landlord changed the locks and access code as part of helping cleaning up the house for an ex-tenant. A month or so later, I learned from another neighbor that Chad's dad had been a local cop and died when Chad was a teenager, and the police gave him a pass on disturbance calls and the like, something he took advantage of. Chad kept pressuring me to give him access to the garage and got really angry when I finally told him no. Maybe his temper stemmed from his lack of height or some other factor, but he was upset enough that his friends had to hold him back from physically attacking me. From that point on, I would find empty beer cans on my lawn. He and his friends would catcall my wife when I saw her alone, and he would park his truck, blocking access to my driveway, would blast music at all hours of the day and night, and other ways to make a nuisance of himself. As winter came, things got worse as he was no longer allowed to park his truck on the street and was denied parking in the visitor lot. Later, some kids vandalized a car cover to his Honda and scratched the paint, which he blamed on me not letting him use my garage. After the new year, I found all of my exterior Christmas decorations ripped off the house and destroyed on my lawn, so I decided to take some revenge. Starting that night, which was the beginning of a really bad cold snap, I watered his car using the garden hose to spray down his car from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every 30 minutes or so, and by the next morning a thick layer of ice covered his Fast and Furious mobile, pinning it to his driveway. I hid the garden hose in my garage before anyone saw it. When Chad saw the state of his car, his rage was legendary. He screamed, yelled, and woke up the entire neighborhood with his antics. The police and fire department came, did nothing, and then left. Chad's friends tried to use various power tools to free his car. One of them actually cut into one of the tires and fender using a sawzall. About a week later, though, the ice had thinned enough that the car popped free, and Chad broke the windshield trying to remove large chunks of ice. That spring, my work contract ended, and I moved away, free of Chad. I decided to share this story as I was still good friends with my previous landlord, and he told me that Chad and his friends are now in jail after they got caught robbing a convenience store or something, just after the recent holidays. And yeah guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to The Readers and to Ripe, and we will see you